Hello folks, welcome back to World War II TV, and we continue our examination of the liberation of the camps 80 years ago with the US 42nd Infantry Division at Dachau. Erin Faith Allen returns to talk about a unit that has been the focus of much of her research, blogging, filmmaking, visiting over the last few years, and we also of course cover Dachau's grim history. So I'll bring her in now. Good afternoon, how are you today?
I am great. How are you, Paul? Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm good, and this era has been, 80 years ago, has been kind of difficult to talk about on the channel because it's combining lots of things. We were just talking before going live. It is, of course, the liberation, but it's also the part of the only thing some of these units that came ashore later across into Europe really got part of. We talked about various units in the last few weeks, and some of the units like the 1st Division, they've been battling since North Africa and had seen lots of things in lots of places. But it ends up that quite a few of the camps, as we talked about with Belsen, the British units, are by units that haven't really had much chance to be confronted by the realities of the war. And then bang, suddenly you find the absolute grim aspect. So before we bring up your slides, I mean, how difficult is it kind of juggling wearing the two hats you do, studying an American infantry division and the veterans, all that, and then looking at the Holocaust? Because obviously it is a shared history, but they are kind of separate. How was the process for you?
Wow, what a great question to start us off with the bang. For me, it's kind of always gone hand in hand studying the two, because I've always been fascinated with that intersection of the Americans who came over to save the day, and then suddenly they're hit in the face with this really horrendous reality that we're going to look at today. And it really merged the two worlds together in ways that nobody would ever forget, as you're about to see. So for me, they're inseparable, and they always have been.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, we'll bring up your slides. So, folks, I can promise you, I've seen the slide. There's a lot of information coming your way. So I'm going to guess that a lot of your questions will be answered as we go along. But that doesn't mean don't ask questions. I will save them all up and probably do the majority of them towards the end of the presentation. But I'm going to hand over to our guest to take us through this. So over to you. And again, it was 80 years ago this week. So, well, today. So incredible.
Yeah, so 80 years ago today, we had this horrendous experience for so many coming to an end. This is a photograph I actually took 2 years ago at the commemoration at Dachau. So it's sort of symbolic, isn't it? We have this horrendous guard tower that was one of the multiple sites at the concentration camp grounds, with some really beautiful flowers growing. So it's a blend of hope and despair, which is exactly what the liberation was. And I really just want to be very clear that there is so much information out in the world about this one specific day in which the 42nd Division and Dachau came face to face. And I have only gleaned from the very, very top what is available. So it's a really condensed overview of something that's super complex. And it's really important to name the other divisions who were present that day. The 3 divisions it was elements of, as a matter of fact, the Rainbow Division, the 45th Division, and the 20th Armored. And they were all there. They all participated in this. And I am going to focus today on the 42nd. I'm a 42nd Division historian, so I'm going to leave everything that has to do with the 45th and the 20th to those historians. So I just want to be clear about that. And just a really quick soundbite about my personal journey. My journey with the Rainbow Division and Dachau itself began 10 years ago when I walked through those fabled gates of Dachau for the very first time. And I immediately started doing my EFA style rabbit hole diving into the history of Dachau. And within a couple of years, I had met my first Rainbow Division veteran and began learning the stories of the division and what happened for them that day. And I began to sort of compile the very foundations for this work that now 10 years later has just been an incredible experience. And on the right of the slide here is my friend Bud Gass, who was a liberator. He was there 80 years ago today. And to the far left of me is Max, who's my buddy, and he's a colleague. He works at Dachau. And this picture was taken a couple years ago with Bud, 2 survivors of Dachau. And I just want to say that before I launch into the historical aspect, that it's really important to acknowledge all the historians and friends and collaborators who I've worked with to compile all this information I'm going to be sharing with you. Yeah. It's not a one-man show.
Indeed. Thank you.
Yeah. So Dachau itself, we're going to start there and we'll build into the liberation itself. Dachau was actually an artist colony, which I find fascinating. It was a typical Bavarian village, and it was an artist colony where if you were an artist, the place to see and be seen in that region was Dachau itself. And that's a whole other presentation. So I won't give you more details than that, but just to like really underscore, this was a wonderful, happy, peaceful, absolutely gorgeous village. Mm. And the turning point for that really occurred when World War I started ramping up, and there was a gunpowder factory built just on the outskirts of Dachau. And the town population surged. Everybody came to town to work. And of course, the economy boomed. It boomed from war, as it does. And then when the war ended, Germany experienced its own economic collapse in general, and the munitions factory fell, and the town fell into despair, economic despair. So then, of course, we have the history we all already know so well that I'm not really going to go into much, but Dachau just happens to be 10 miles northwest of Munich. And this is the birthplace, of course, of the Nazi Party. So this sweet little village is just outside of the area where all of these things started brewing. And then, of course, 1933, January, Hitler is now the Reich Chancellor, and things began moving very quickly. And I find this just a really interesting piece of information that I found on a blog run by a man named Timothy Block. We can see that there was a party election in March of 33, and the National Socialists, or the Nazi Party, actually came in third in that election within the town of Dachau itself. And I just thought that was a really interesting perspective. I think historically we all tend to think that, oh gosh, you know, everybody was voting in the National Socialists. And in fact, they were not. So,
and also a reminder that the camp system was gradual. You know, it starts off the internment of political prisoners and undissolved, and gradually over the years ramps up until you get the full-blown extermination camps. But it's not like suddenly after the Wannsee conference, suddenly the final solution begins. The process of separating those who they didn't want to be part of the Third Reich had begun very early, chillingly and unfortunately, of course. And I think that we need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, that's sort of emphasized a little bit in the coming slides as well, Paul, because I think it's super important for us to remember that it's a slow, steady creep that makes these things happen. So immediately, Himmler decides to convert our munitions factory into a protective custody camp to restore calm to Germany. Now, it's often said that Dachau was the very first camp, but it was not, as a matter of fact. It's the first of its kind in Bavaria. And I think it's on the next slide, Paul. We'll see that the very first camp opened its doors March 3rd. So, I mean, this is like, what, not even 2 months after the Nazis basically gained power. There's already a camp near Weimar that opens on March 3rd. And then Oranienburg opens 1 day before Dachau on March 21st. And Oranienburg, of course, becomes Sachsenhausen. So on March 22nd, the very first prisoners into Dachau arrive. And this is an actual photograph of an actual busload of the first prisoners going into what were then the gates of Dachau. So that's pretty astounding. I mean, what are these people inside of this bus thinking? What is happening to their country? What is going on? They're going to some kind of prison now. And they're going because they are communists. They are opponents to the Nazi regime. And I think on the next slide, Paul, I've made a list of all the other types of people who would have been rounded up at the beginning stages of these camps. And this is an interior shot of Dachau. These people are social democrats, trade unionists, journalists, vocal opponents, political dissidents, anyone that was seen as dangerous to the Reich. Now, if there was someone Jewish in this camp at this point in time, it is likely because, even though we know that the Nazis were out to get the Jews from the very beginning, it was likely because they were also one of these things. And so this is that steady drip we're talking about. Start slow.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep our eyes on this guy. This is Friedrich Rupert, and he begins work at Dachau in April 33 as an electrician. And we'll see that he does not stay an electrician forever, but just bookmark this guy in your brain. The first SS guards arrive in May. So now we're just like 2 months after the first prisoners arrive. The police at first, for these first 2 months, were guarding the prisoners, and things were not amazing. There was a lot of abuse and gnarly stuff going on, but it really starts to get serious when the SS arrive.
Yeah.
And then this is a really old photograph that shows the writing on the roof of the administrative building, which is still at Dachau. It's one of the original structures that remains. And it's, of course, the sick, twisted propaganda that they used to place like on the gates, for example. One path to freedom with milestones of obedience, honesty, cleanliness, sobriety, hard work, discipline, sacrifice, truthfulness, and love of the fatherland. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the games really begin at this point. This is when it starts happening. And of course, I don't mean that in a fun way. I'm talking about really grim things that are starting to happen to people all across Germany and will spread. And I put this slide in as a point of reference, or as a point of interest, excuse me, because if you look behind Himmler and his cronies, you can see the writing that we just spoke of on the roof behind them.
Yeah.
So it really anchors us.
It does, yeah. And people are already in the sidebar talking about the parallels of, not we're going to go into the parallels of the current world we live in, but it begins with just silencing people who are against the flow of things. It's just, and then it ramps up into the racial thing. It's just, no matter how many times you hear these stories, it's not in the past, this stuff. These principles are still things and principles that we should be fighting for right across the world. It's just, I hate that these things are still relevant, 2025, but I digress down a rabbit hole I shouldn't be going down, but it's alarming how many parallels there are. But anyway, back to you. Sorry for being so gloomy and doom there, but
no, it's okay. I relate. One of the things that I have learned through doing this work is that humans have always been this way, and humans will always be this way, and it is depressing. Yeah. So I just keep my head in the 1930s and 40s, and I don't know. So, okay. So the next few, I think 4 or 5 slides even, Paul, because I couldn't stop, are newspaper articles in the English language. Yeah. This is May 33. So this is 2 months after Dachau opens, and this is being reported internationally in English-speaking languages that this camp is a thing. And as of May 26, 1933, the foreign press are reporting 37 have been killed or died inside of Dachau. So everyone's knowing about this. This is not like some tiny little secret.
Yeah. Oops, sorry.
That's all right.
There we go. Yeah.
There's even a famous saying, and I've seen this over and over again. It was widespread through Germany. Dear Lord God, make me dumb or silent. That's what they meant by that word. So that I will not to Dachau come. So nobody wanted to go to Dachau. So this worked as not only was it a container for their political enemies, it was probably the first fear tactic that was used to get people to stay in line. Like, if you speak out against us, you're going to end up in a camp.
Yeah. Yeah. Awful.
So we can probably go through these pretty quickly. They are all similar articles, but this is October 33. Somebody's who has escaped, a communist leader has escaped and describes the tortures that are going on inside. And then in April 1934, a Montana newspaper prints a map of Dachau, which I found astounding. I mean, I think I expected that they would have, all of this would have been more under wraps, but it really was not. And in America and in England and Australia, people were knowing of this.
I think it's, you know, they clearly were. No one could have foreseen at that point the scale. You know, it's worrying, it's awful, it's tragic, but yeah, you'd have had to have been an incredibly pessimistic and you know, suspicious person to kind of really believe just the extent of where this went. You know, it's like that kind of thing when they, you know, when they uncover a serial killer, but at the beginning they just think he's killed one, and you find out later it isn't. You know, it's been dozens. I think it's that same kind of thing now. This alarmed the world, but people just weren't prepared for the scale it was going to get, which is to all of our collective shame in some ways, in that we should have seen it coming. Those of us that were around in 1930, which I wasn't, we should have seen it coming and maybe tried to nip it in the bud earlier. But yeah, we need to be reminded that the world did know about this long before Eisenhower sets foot in a camp in 45.
Absolutely. I mean, I recall, I don't think it was related to Dachau, but I recall a story of a Jewish man escaping from one of the extermination camps. Dachau was an extermination camp. There was a difference, but this man escaped and ran back to his community and said, "They're killing us." And the people were like, "No, yeah, I'm a World War I veteran. I might be Jewish." Exactly. But so you're right. I mean, that's an important thing to remember as well. Yeah, it's cognitive dissonance. We can't believe these bad things will happen. Exactly. So the townspeople knew this was happening as well. This woman who, again, I found this on Timothy Locke's blog. When you went for walks and got anywhere near this camp, no one said anything. They said it was a powder factory. And some people get sent there. No one spoke about it, but you knew there was something sinister behind those walls. Mm. And another quote from a woman who worked as a nurse in the Dachau hospital, the town, not the camp. And she's speaking about the work crews and how everybody knew they were there because they would march through the streets and you could hear their wooden clogs on the pavement or on the rocks. And then in 1935, the Nuremberg laws are passed, and that's when things start really tipping over into horrific things. This is just another newspaper headline saying 44 done to death at Dachau. Mm. It's continuing. The awareness is continuing, and the madness is continuing. And then 1938, we have Kristallnacht, and this is when things really start getting horrible for the Jewish people. It had been escalating and getting more and more horrible, that slow drip. And this was horrible. 11,000 Jewish men are sent to Dachau alone, let alone all the other horrible things that happened on that night. And this photograph fascinates me. I wasn't able to find a source, unfortunately, but this is allegedly a Jewish storefront in Vienna in 1938, and it just basically says they've gone to Dachau. So
harrowing stuff, and thank you for putting all these images together. As harrowing and as upsetting as they are, fantastically well put together. We're all learning a lot, even though we knew some of it, but it's having it in sequence like this is just a reminder of just, as you say, the process, the constant cranking it up and increasing it and legitimizing it, and it becoming more and more normal for those who are the perpetrators. Yeah, awful.
Yeah, it's like the frog boiling in the pot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So World War II begins, and 44,000 points of incarceration begin. And this is, throughout the war, this is the magnitude that it reached. But this is when people are really now starting to be scooped up. And, for any and all reasons, which we'll see here in a little bit. But again, Dachau remains a camp for mostly political prisoners. And this graphic, I believe this is at Dachau. I believe that's where I sourced this, but it just shows, how the prisoners were designated. And I think when I started learning years ago about who ended up in the camps and why, I was so shocked by how many people I know in today that would have ended up in the camps based on these, crimes. So
I think it's a very important fact, because all the time we think of it as being the extermination of the Jews. It only allows the Jewish people, in a sense, to be part of this evil. But everybody watching this right now, under some category, we could fit under one or two of those headings. I mean, who counts as an intellectual? Who counts as an artist? You're an artist. I've created books. Am I an artist? Am I an intellectual? How many of us are homosexual? I mean, antisocial. What the hell is antisocial? I've definitely been antisocial in my life. So it's worrying to think, as you said, how many of us would come under one of those categories or more than one of those categories. So it's a world problem, that the extermination of these people is not just a Jewish issue that it often is so labeled as. And of course they are the biggest sufferers, but we are all part of it. We are all part of we're all on the list somewhere, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to get too off the rails here, but by this time, by 1939, Ravensbrück concentration camp for women has opened. And the women inside Ravensbrück are, women who wear red lipstick, or who, supposedly sleep around, or maybe they, drink too much. I mean, this is real. This is very real. This happened. Yeah. So yes, everybody almost that you and I know, and everybody watching, would have multiple people rounded up. So again, this is a fear tactic. This is keeping people under the thumb because they're terrified. I mean, if you have a child or children, or, an elderly mother that you're responsible for, are you really going to step out of line to, like, no, you
just want to keep under the radar, keep out of the way, try and not be seen. Yeah. Wow. Amazing stuff.
So we're going to look at some of the types of people who were held at Dachau briefly. I really want to remind everyone, these people that I'm going to be talking about, including the soldiers, they are full-fleshed, full-blooded humans with emotions and heartbeats and loves and hates and dreams, and they're just like us. And these are some of the people who end up in the camps. Unfortunately, I cannot go into each of their biographies, but if you're curious, go for it.
Look them up. Yeah.
David Bloch. Look at this beautiful man. He was an artist. He was Jewish. He was deaf. He was rounded up on Kristallnacht. Fortunately, he got out. I think he was held for about 4 weeks, but he was extremely susceptible to the violence because he was deaf, which makes me seriously upset even thinking about it. But he ends up emigrating to Shanghai, thank God, and he creates art for the rest of his life. And this is one of his paintings of the Appellplatz at Dachau. And I just think we can see so much in this one painting about the overwhelm of the experience of being in one of these camps.
Yeah, the scale again, yeah.
This is Georg Tauber. He was an antisocial prisoner. Antisocial because he was a morphine addict from being wounded and being given morphine in the hospital, and then he became addicted. He was a prisoner from 40 to 45, and we will be seeing him a little bit later, but look at his beautiful art. It's incredible.
Mm.
This song was written by these two men, Jura Seufer and Herbert Zipper. It's the Dachau song, and they wrote it based on the Arbeit macht frei on the Iron Gates, which was the prisoners' entrance to the camp. And if you Google this song, you will find performances of it.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to listen to. And apparently it gave these men so much joy when they would hear, you know, from off at the fields, the plantation, they called it, where the men worked the fields, they'd hear this song being sung or muttered under someone's breath. So the arts are alive and well in the camp.
Yeah.
And then Edgar wrote Secret Diary. He was a pacifist. So how many of us would say, hey, I don't really agree with all this stuff that's going on, all this violence, and I'm not going to participate in it? That was Edgar. And he ends up keeping a diary. He's able to write nearly every day, and we'll be seeing him a little bit later as well. So these are the artists who were locked up. Then there's the priest block. There were a massive amount of priests or fathers or clergy of some sort in Dachau. As you can see, the number is around 2,700 that have been recorded. Mm. One of those priests is Martin Niemöller. We all know this expression, it's not quite a poem, but this statement about how he did not speak out when they came for the socialists and the unionists and the Jews, but then they came for him. And because he didn't speak out for the others, there was no one left to speak for him. Martin was held in Dachau. He was not there on the day of liberation, but his statement alone is a huge reminder.
Yeah.
And then we have the medical experiments, which I have just learned about in depth for the very first time, and it's just utterly sickening what these prisoners went through. The priests bore the brunt of this. Many, many, many priests went through the experimentation, and we can see that diary page of Edgar's in the background in which he speaks of witnessing the experiments and the effects on the priests. And these experiments were overall experiments about malaria and then also aviation with the Luftwaffe.
Yeah.
And, these are actual photographs of an inmate being subjected to horrible things on behalf of the Luftwaffe.
Which is a reminder again that everybody's culpable. You know, this idea that only the SS were doing bad stuff and the Luftwaffe were fine, the Kriegsmarine were fine, and it all connects. It all connects. You know, there were, of course, there were individuals who didn't know the extent of it, but the Third Reich was culpable as an organization. All aspects of it. This filtered through everything, and so we accept that now. But for so long, we were just blaming it on the minority. It was just the SS, the Luftwaffe. They were the knights of the skies. Now everybody is part of this process, alas, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you study this stuff long enough, and you just have to come to that conclusion. There's no other way. And some of the things I want to say, some of the things that I read that they did to these men, I will never repeat. It is horrendous what they went through.
Yeah.
So the person who oversaw this at the tippy top was this man, Siegfried Ruff. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing names. He was the director of aviation medicine at the German Experimental Institute for Aviation, and experimenting it was. And our friend Georg, the artist, the antisocial, who was in Dachau for his morphine addiction, was given the job of drawing, so documenting these experiments, and he refused. And interesting point, by coincidence, I'm sort of realizing now, I believe the Polish barracks were at the very end of this row of what used to be barracks and are now just graveled spots at the memorial site. But if anybody knows Dachau, I believe the priests were, or the clergy were, in the very back there.
Okay, thank you.
So the next area that we're going to look at is the bunker. If you've been to Dachau, you've probably been in this building. It is horrendous. That seems to be the key word of today, Paul, horrendous. So the bunker, I think the next slide, yes, is taken from the other end of the bunker, of this courtyard, behind the administration building, and you can still go inside the bunker, which is also the prison. So this is where other tortures happened. And you can still go into many of these cells, and it is ominous, it is heavy, and it is extremely sobering and chilling. And many of us who are here today probably know of the story of these 4 women who were held in the bunker for at least a night in September of 1944. Women were SOE, British Secret or Special, sorry, my brain, SOE, I'm going to leave it at that for now.
Special Operations Executive, there we are.
I knew you'd jump in and save the day. My brain started stuttering and spinning there. So they were taken to the bunker. There are tons of differing accounts, as usual, as to what exactly happened, but they were likely tortured in some form there, and then they were taken to you can go to the next slide, Paul. They were taken out to the execution pit, which was out beside the crematorium, and they were executed. And again, there are different versions of this story, and maybe someday I'll come back and give a talk and remember how to say SOE at that point. But we have to slip right on through this story. Now, one important point that I really do want to share is on the next slide as well, and that is that this person who we met at the very beginning, who began his work at Dachau as an electrician, is accused years later of having been the person who either ordered or executed these women. And this is a piece of the concentration camp history that not many people know, and that is the camp brothels. And again, I have to slide through this very briefly, but this was real. This was in Dachau. The brothel in Dachau existed from May 1944 until December of 1944. And on the next slide, I have the interior of the Mauthausen brothel. The Dachau brothel has been torn down. It's no longer there, but this is a glimpse of what the brothels, which were spread across the camp system, looked like. And this woman was one of the women who was forced to work in Dachau as a sex laborer, which is a whole other layer of trauma for these people who were forced to do this. It was instituted as a reward for the men who did good work. And this was no Jews were allowed. This was a non-Jewish opportunity. The women were also largely German, recruited from Ravensbrück, promised a better life if they did this work, and promised freedom after 6 months, which of course was a lie. So this is also occurring at Dachau. Now we're going to scoot to 1945, the end of the war, the death marches and the death trains going all of the camps were having this insane movement. They're moving prisoners around. The executions are becoming hard. They can't burn the bodies because they're out of coal. Things like this logistically mean they are shuffling the prisoners around. And I'm, again, just scooting right through that topic. So on April 8th, 4,480 prisoners depart Buchenwald on a death train. And 21 days later, it arrives at Dachau. And it goes to the side, sort of a rail yard that runs along the side of Dachau. And there are, according to numbers, 816 prisoners are barely alive, but alive. One of those prisoners is Ben Lesser, who was a Polish Jew who had already been to hell and back about 4,000 times by the time he got to Dachau. He was on this train with his cousin Isaac, and en route, Ben was stabbed actually through the chin, like a pretty big wound while trying to secure bread for him and Isaac. He tore a piece of his pants off of the bottom hem of his pants and wrapped his chin. It's a miracle he didn't die of just infection alone.
Yeah.
So when the train finally arrives at Dachau, they climb over the top of the dead people in their specific carriage or wagon, and they fall out onto the ground at Dachau and they go into the camp. Ben said that people were licking the ground to try to get water. It is now 3 days before liberation.
And it's just worth mentioning, I'll give you a break for your voices, that we've been talking on this series about the dilemmas the Allies are facing in 45. Are they trying to still destroy the German war machine? Are they trying to liberate peoples and bring them freedom? Are they trying to gain territory? And that's the kind of the debate the Allies are having of how to best use their resources, but all for the purpose of bringing the war to an end. Whatever, it's all for that ultimate goal. The Third Reich at this point are still using stupid amounts of their logistics and their resources just to move prisoners around, to keep on killing them, to keep on. It beggars belief that even when they're losing the war, even when it's not in their interests, that they could just abandon these camps. Okay, we're going to fall back and try and defend stuff. They're still spending huge efforts, still trying to kill people. It gives you the distinction of the methodology between the Allies and the Axis. The Allies are trying to bring the war to the end, and the Germans are still just trying to follow their ideology and kill those they hate. It's mind-blowing that it's just 80 years ago, the world was like that. It's just horrendous all the way around. As you said, that is the word of the day.
Yeah, I've always been gobsmacked by that myself. Like, what is going on in this sheer madness at this point? This like hysterical need to just destroy. To
keep on doubling down, just keep on destroying. Yeah, don't backpedal a bit, just keep on going with it. It's as people are saying, it's a death cult. But anyway, let's move to the liberation and slightly cheer ourselves up a little bit. Yeah,
it's a heavy topic for sure, but it's about to somewhat lighten a little bit. So we're talking about the 42nd Division, the Rainbow Division, and this is just a brief glimpse, very brief, at their overall war that they had so far. This is the map that was created right after the war. If you ever get a chance to look at this up close, I recommend it. It's really interesting. These men had a total of 106, I believe, days in combat. They started out in the south of France, and they had a massive encounter in the Hatton and Hagenau, Schweighausen area, where it was Operation Nordwind. So if you know of Nordwind, you know what they faced. If you know the tank battles of Hatton, you know what they faced. They really got it there. They were hit really hard. They watched their friends die. Tons of valor. It was a full-blown combat experience. And then they traveled north. They had a similar experience as they crossed the Siegfried line. And they had a similar experience again in Würzburg, which is right up there at the top of the rainbow. Then again in Schweinfurt, Donauwörth, and right about at that point after the Donauwörth attack, they hit the Dachau region. So that's a way too fast overview, but we're here for Dachau. So just a brief look at their numbers. They lost 685, and they had over 1,000 prisoners of war taken, and many are still missing in action, by the way. They are led by Generals Harry Collins and Henning Linden, who we will see a lot more of in the following slides. But these two men brought them from Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, over to Europe.
We had a question from Stuart about where the 42nd are from. Because we have the National Guard divisions and the regular divisions. I mean, towards the end of the war, it's usually a bit of everybody, but they do have ties to certain areas, don't they?
Usually, yeah. The thing about the Rainbow Division is I actually cut these slides because my slide deck was so long. But very quickly, Stuart, in World War I, the Rainbow Division was created from units all across the country. And that's exactly where they got their name, because Douglas MacArthur, who was a part of the Rainbow Division himself, I believe he was a major at the time, said, this division is like the rainbow. It spreads across the country. It's pulled from everywhere. It has all the colors of the rainbow. And of course, he meant that metaphorically. And so that's how the division got the name Rainbow Division. And it was the same thing in World War II. Okay,
thank you.
So this is where we sit on April 29th, early in the morning. The regiments are just north of Dachau, and the order has come in to take Munich, and to take Munich really fast. They are to get there. They're to go hell for leather, balls to the wall, get to Munich. And, you know, why Munich? Well, as you and I were talking before the show, Paul, there's probably a lot of reasons why exactly they were to go to Munich. You know, things were mapped out and charted out ahead of time. Also, psychologically, which we're kind of sticking to the psychological orientation of things on this presentation. This is the birthplace of Nazism.
Yeah.
So here's a quote. I have a lot of quotes from the guys going forward. So this is David Buck, who says Munich was the big prize we had all been waiting for. And then, you know, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, he says that whether it was from a tourist standpoint or that the capture of the city means the downfall of the, you know, birth of Nazism, we got the orders to pack up and go and to roll for Munich, and we really rolled. And that is true. I mean, it was like, the reports are like, get there and get there yesterday. So Sidney Schaffner was with the INR platoon, and they were shooting at a church tower, which, as we all know, is standard because you want to get the snipers out of the tower, right? And as the tower came down, he said two young people in the prison clothing, black and white striped clothing, came running toward them and said, they're killing people in the camp down the road. Hurry, hurry, you've got to do something. And Sidney said, hey, if you guys are circus people, I don't have time for your jokes, you know, because of what they were dressed in. And they said, no, we're not kidding. It's real. And so he ran that information to his commanding officer.
And this is the point where we need to reference what we were talking about before going on live. Is David O'Keefe, regular on the channel, you know, ultra knew about the camps for years, and he's suggesting through his research that at a high level, divisions were being sent on routes that would take them past these places so they could liberate them, which makes sense. Although the goal, as we established in other shows, is to destroy the German war machine, is to surround the final German unit. They are steering units in this way, which just begs the question why information hadn't at the very least filtered down to some of the intelligence operators within divisions, some of the commanders, you know. But to think that they don't even, you know, they think these guys, because they see the camp uniforms, they think, as you say, it's a circus. It means they have zero frame of reference, because in the military, you know, you have these you know, groups, you have the briefing of what the latest intelligence is going to be. We're expecting to meet these kind of tanks now. We might be experiencing this. They've been given nothing about what might be happening ahead of them, and yet we know that at a higher level they know exactly where these guys are going. It's an odd situation, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've read the division reports, and there's no, it's kind of like this sudden, like, oh, there's this detour.
There's this thing, yeah.
And it was complete and utter chaos, but we'll see that here in a minute.
Yeah.
So this is Harry Collins, General Collins, who says, we were ordered to attack Munich, and we were told that Dachau was in our path, and we're going to go liberate it. Just straightforward, like every general, right? I love reading generals' reports.
Matter of fact, buy the book. Here's what you're gonna do. Yeah.
I don't mess around. So Narin Gun was a Turkish prisoner who wrote a book in 1966 called The Day of the Americans. It's a really beautiful book. It's out of print, but everybody should read it. And I love what he says here. The Americans were not simply advancing. They were running, flying, breaking all the rules of military conduct. The 2nd Battalion of the 222nd Regiment of the 42nd Division was coming brazenly, impudently down the highway, its general in its lead. And I find that really describes the general mood. It was just like, get there fast. And the commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion of the 222nd Infantry Regiment is Colonel Downard, who was a much loved officer by General Collins and by his men. Truly, like truly adored this man. I adore this man. And back then his men loved him, believed in him. They would have followed him to hell. And on April 29th, they did. So here's a map of the camp and some of the points we've talked about and some of the points we are going to be talking about. You know, if you rewatch this later, you can press pause and you can take a look at, you know, some of the areas like the bunker and the brothel. But right now we're going to look at area 12 over to the left of the map, which is where the death train from Buchenwald arrived, approximately. That area is no longer there. So this is an approximation.
Okay, thank you.
So the death train, very, very grim. And I have a load of pictures ahead. So just letting you know ahead of time, you're going to be seeing some stuff that might be hard to look at. But Ben Lesser, this is the very death train that he climbed out of with his cousin Isaac. And I just wanted to show you his picture to just kind of give you the visual reference point.
Yeah, we'll go back to him. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I moved on too quickly there. Yeah.
No, you were fine. You can read me well, Paul. We got this down.
We're a good team. Yeah,
we are. It's great. You're keeping me in line. Okay, so this is just General Linden is sharing what he encountered when he came to the death train. Now, I really need to let everyone know this chaos I keep mentioning was very real. And to sit and split hairs over exact timing and chronology and positions, and that's a whole thing. And it would be hard because of the fog of war, and everybody was kind of everywhere at this point. So we're starting with the death train, and then we'll move on to a couple other things. So in his report later, General Linden said that when he was en route to the camp itself, he came across the death train. And he counted 30 to 50 cars, all kinds of cars, flat cars, passenger cars, and there were bodies everywhere. And as far as he could see, most of them showed signs of starvation or beating or shooting or all three. Now, I just want you all to imagine you're a GI. You've been in combat. You've watched your buddies run, fire guns. Some of them get hit. Some of them die. You've been hungry and thirsty and cold in your own way. You've seen some stuff. That's combat, right? And then you come to this place that you're supposed to go and help these people, and you see this string of train cars. And inside, as you creep closer, you start to see something that matches the stench in the air, which is bodies piled up. This car, according to the sort of head counts of the cars that a lot of the GIs gave, is actually lightly packed. It doesn't have as many bodies as some of the others. But the soldiers report that these bodies were emaciated. They had whip marks, scars and bruises everywhere. And some of the cars had actually been shot up with machine guns. So they said, like, what did the prisoners do to the guards? To what happened in this car that the guard went mad and shot up the entire car? This is what you're walking into. Also, these photographs are black and white, which gives us sort of a separation, right? It doesn't seem as real. But our GIs who liberated the camp saw this in full color.
Yeah.
And they were not prepared for this.
And despite the fact there are atrocities on battlefronts, a unit like the 42nd, to most extent, there'd been some kind of rules of war for their previous combat. There was the understanding that prisoners on both sides would be taken care of. There's a professionalism to some extent of being the infantry, of doing your job, and the enemy are doing their job as well. This is not that. This is no rule. This is innocent people. This is victims. It's violence for the sake of violence, as opposed to these guys have been killing German soldiers to get the job done, to liberate towns. And this kind of wanton violence would have been, as we talked about with Edward Brooks and Belson, just something they'd never seen before.
Yes, in the extended period of time it takes to torture someone into this. Look how thin these men are.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a whole different level of psychology, in my opinion. I've never been in combat, and I've never been in a concentration camp, so I can only guess. So I chose this image for two reasons. The arrow points to the length of the train from the vantage point we're at, and that shows us. Like, can you imagine walking car after car and seeing this kind of carnage? This was not one car, not one passenger carriage, one wagon. This was like, I think a reporter counted 49 is the most sort of sturdy number that I saw. I also like to contemplate this picture because it's blurry. It shows us how frenetic and the cognitive dissonance that you would go through in your brain to try to, Paul, and you and I were talking about this a little, like, what is going on here? Like, nothing makes sense when you encounter something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then here is another, here's another view of the same thing. Again, the arrow points to, you know, the number of cars that we have going off into the horizon. It's incomprehensible. I've literally sat and tried to imagine this, and I can't. And this is what Ben Lesser climbed out of. This is, he could have been one of these people laying on the side of it.
And as Gary reminds us, this isn't a death camp. This is not.
That's right.
At the worst end of what the Third Reich and the Nazis did. This is awful and despicable, and as we say again, horrendous. But it's not Treblinka, it's not Sobibor, it's not. So you know that. Yeah, that incredibly awful.
Yeah, Dachau was a work camp.
Yeah.
In a you know, what is it called? Protected custody camp.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember Colonel Downard. He's the commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion. This is such a crazy story. I will try to tell this without going into tears. It's really amazing. So a gentleman, a soldier, a GI, who really was a gentleman, named Tony Cardinali, is walking along this stretch of tracks. And he's looking into the cars, just like everybody was, in absolute horror. And suddenly he sees a hand from under a pile of bodies, slightly moving and slightly flickering. And he jumps up into the car to the flickering hand, and he says, hi, I'm an American soldier. Are you alive? And this Polish prisoner, who was barely alive, said, Fry? Meaning, of course, free. Am I free? And Tony said, yes, you are free. And he said, just hold on a minute. Tony jumps out of the car. He sees Colonel Downard. He runs to Colonel Downard and he says, hey, Colonel, there's a live one. And Colonel Downard runs over with Roy Wellborn from the 692nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. They jump up into the car. There's a photographer there, and they free this prisoner from the death train, who is the only known survivor from that day still alive on the train. Now, I just want you to notice that on Colonel Downard's left hand, he has a cast. He was in a battle 4 days before at Donauworth, riding a tank, leading his men into battle. And all kinds of carnage happened. He was blown off the tank and he hurt his wrist and he refused to leave. He's still leading his men. So we have him with his right arm rescuing this prisoner while his left arm is in a cast from a battle in which he lost a ton of men and friends. And he's still up saving the day. Now, I just need to tell you that Colonel Downard insists on personally escorting this prisoner to the aid station. On the way, their Jeep takes fire and the driver crashes the Jeep. It rolls. Colonel Downard and the survivor end up in a ditch. And Colonel Downard wakes up in the aid station and the survivor is to his left. And he spends the rest of his life, as do all of these men, by the way, wondering about this survivor. And I'm sure all of you are wondering too, did he survive? Well, at a certain point, he is identified. Long story short, and somebody notifies Colonel Downard, hey, we've identified that survivor. This is years, decades after the war. And Colonel Downard is overjoyed. He's so happy about this. And he dies 2 days later of a heart attack. Man was a serious, as we say in America, badass. And there's a lot more to that story, but we can move on.
Yeah, amazing stuff. Thank you so much for sharing all this stuff.
Yes. And the survivor, it has been disproven it was that person, but everyone's pretty happy that Colonel Downard left this earth believing that the survivor had survived and lived and thrived, and can't ask for more than that.
Yeah, so, it's about his own personal journey, if you like, of all the things that were clearly in his head there, that, as we talked about before going live, that you can't take on board thousands, but you can kind of understand the plight of one person because your brain can take it on board. And for him, that was his, did he survive, representing, and again, you know, the spirit of all the others in some ways, I suppose. Yeah, that if one survived, then it's sort of worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So I just told you the story. I got carried away.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no problem.
And then this is just yet another, image of the train. Obviously, they've painted on it off limits. The bodies in Dachau and in the train, in the whole facility, stayed for a few days until support and logistics and everything could take over. It took a minute. They weren't prepared for that. So Jack Westbrook, he was in the anti-tank company of the 222nd. He had been wounded in the Hart Mountains crossing the Siegfried Line. And about 5 weeks later, he's released. And his first day back, he's sent to the regiment. And his first order of duty is to find Colonel Downard at Dachau. And so Jack goes and walks through the gates and he sees everything that we know was there. He eventually finds Colonel Downard. And I think this really speaks to Colonel Downard's character as well. Jack vomited on Colonel Downard's shoes when he found him. And Jack says he was both kindly and sympathetic about the messy incident. Nevertheless, he masterfully moved to my side in case I should have to vomit again. But this is a common theme. There is a lot of that happening. The body the brain was processing, trying, but the body was overstressed.
I mean, it happened to Patton himself. I mean, people say he was vomited, some people with like regurgitation, but if someone as theoretically as tough as old boots as Patton would have a physical reaction, then of course younger people would have the same situation. Yeah, so yeah, completely understandable.
Yeah. Okay, so now we are going to move to number 11 on our map, which is the entrance gate. And I have a visual for you to see. This is obviously taken after, or as I should say, the SS are surrendering, but this is the main gate that we are going to move through with General Linden and Marguerite Higgins, a reporter, and a convoy of other jeeps. Again, the chaos, right? So we moved through 11, and then we're turning right and moving towards number 10 on the map. to what is called the Jourhaus. Now, if you've ever been to Dachau, you have walked through the gates of the Jourhaus. Number 11, the main gates, that's gone, been torn down. The Jourhaus may look familiar to you. So this is where General Linden and his Jeeps and Marguerite Higgins arrive. And General Linden, this is Marguerite Higgins. She was a reporter, and
we've got an entire show on Marguerite Higgins with her biographer. So that was a few.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. We did we didn't talk about the Dachau though. We talked. Well, she did a lot in her career, to be fair.
She did.
But yeah, but we have an entire show on her, folks. So I'll put the link in the description later on.
Yeah, please do. I want to watch myself. Now, just a quick little side note. We had other, because I probably won't go into this, we had other female correspondents at Dachau, like Lee Miller. She was there April 30th, a personal heroine of mine, and she took a number of photographs of Dachau. But Marguerite, Lee, all the ladies were there as well. So General Linden, he turns right, drives up to that gate, and he sees three people standing there. One is Victor Maurer, who is the Red Cross representative, who is there to negotiate the surrender. And then two SS troopers. One is Lieutenant, I think his first name is Heinrich Vicker, and his aide, who as of yet remains nameless. I haven't found his name, so he will be referred to as the aide. And here's a photograph of negotiations happening. So we have Maurer has his back to us. He's holding a broomstick or something with a white flag on it. Vicker, the SS commandant, is somewhat hidden behind his aide, but he's there. And of course, General Linden is on the right. Now, Vicker and I believe his aide had only just arrived the night before. The official commandant of Dachau had taken off, he skedaddled, and there had also been a death march taken out of Dachau around the same time. So Maurer asked Linden if he was an officer of the American Army, to which Linden replied, "Yes, I am Assistant Division Commander of the 42nd Division and will accept the surrender of the camp in the name of the Rainbow Division for the American Army." And here we have another photograph. There's a better shot of Vicker and Maurer, and Linden has his back to the camera, and we can see some of the other guys. These are probably Linden's bodyguards and aides. Mm-hmm. And Marguerite Higgins' version of the story is much longer than this, and I'm still only going to read just a fraction of what she wrote. But she says, "But the minute the two of us entered," meaning sneaking away from where the negotiations were happening and sweet talking a GI into opening the gates, according to her story, "The minute the two of us entered, a jangled barrage of 'Are you Americans?' in about 16 languages came from the barracks just 200 yards from the gate," which if you've been to Dachau, you can totally see this. It's all still there. "An affirmative nod caused pandemonium. Tattered, emaciated men weeping, yelling, and shouting, 'Long live America,' swept toward the gate in a mob. Those who could not walk limped or crawled." And these are the ones who were able to walk. And this is probably a bit later. They're being thrown cigarettes, and you can just see the absolute, I mean, ecstasy, really, right? That this freedom is causing.
Yeah.
So this is Lieutenant Colonel Walter J. Fellens, who was known as Mickey Fellens. So if you hear me call him Mickey later, it's not an accident. So he's there now as well. His entourage has arrived, and he's witnessing what is going on behind these gates. He notes that there was a barbed wire fence. Many of the people were describing this, and he is one of many who says that at least one man dies by being pushed against the barbed wire fence during the liberation, which is heartbreaking to. So he says that the noise was beyond comprehension, and their hearts were weeping. And I want to say before I forget that Mickey Fellens is somebody who devoted, along with many of the other men, devoted his life to telling and documenting this story and speaking about it and suffering from it. It mentally affected these men, but we'll talk about that a little more later too. And this is another picture. Again, these are the healthier prisoners. I know sometimes people say, oh, it wasn't, you know, wasn't that bad. No, these are the healthier prisoners. These are the ones who haven't been held for as long as some of the others, or had positions in the camp that enabled them to eat more and have better care.
We had a question from Ian Carr about, was there any point when the members of the 42nd felt they were going to be kind of overwhelmed by, there was a dangerous situation? I mean, that was exactly what we had on the Belsen show last year, where the British soldiers were worried for their own safety. They're worried for the safety of the prisoners they've just taken amongst the Germans. Their prisoners kind of angry. It seems from what you're saying is that this manages to keep things a little bit calmer. Is that the broad truth?
No.
Okay, there we go.
We'll get there in a nutshell. Okay. It's a great question, and I am not familiar by exactly what happened at Belsen. Another show of yours, Paul, that I need to watch. So I don't know in comparison how this would be, but
we'll let you tell the story.
Yeah. So the inmates did just rush the prisoners. We have so many accounts of like, what did it feel like to be mobbed by very sick. We know many of them had typhus. They were infested with, lice, and they were very unwell. The smell was unbearable. These men were surrounded by the prisoners. So there are a whole bunch of different pieces to this. Again, I'm just giving you the frosting on the top of the cake, but Lyndon draws his pistol and has to start firing overhead to sort of start to calm the crowd. And we can see here that this is probably what it looked like to be on the other side of the Jorhaus gate after it had been, I imagine this is taken after it had been closed again. You can see how many people are out on the Appellplatz.
Yeah.
So we are going to just step back in time for a moment with our friend Edgar, who kept the diary, who was the pacifist, and talk about the Jorhaus and the symbolism of the Americans being at the Jorhaus. So he's describing in his diary what it felt like to walk through those gates as a prisoner. Something grim, something awful, something ice cold hung over everything. Never before in my life have I felt a setting to be so unconditionally dangerous and hostile. And this is what all 33,000 prisoners inside of Dachau would have experienced. And now we have at the next picture, we have General Lyndon, the American general, with a contingent of American GIs and other, associated people like Victor Maurer and reporters standing at the gates, right where it said Arbeit macht frei, right where they were held and tortured for so long. General Lyndon is there with his gun. The prisoners had a hard time accepting that, wait, we're free and now you're locking us up again, as you might imagine. And that was distressing for some of the soldiers. And then this is another shot. Again, I don't know about chronology necessarily here with this one, but these are some of the SS being rounded up. And this is outside the Jorhaus gates, right on the other side of the Arbeit macht frei. And we can see Mickey Fellens and Marguerite Higgins in the background.
And were there any cases within the 42nd Division that you know of anybody wanting to just summarily execute some of these German guys? I mean, it absolutely happened at Belsen. In fact, two SS guys demanded that a British soldier shoot them to put them out of what they're going to be having to face for the crimes they committed. And this British soldier, not knowing what to do, took them around the back of a hut and did execute them. And were tensions high? I mean, well, obviously tensions were high, but was that a situation that might have happened?
Yes, and it might be on the next slide. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Your timing is impeccable.
I have done this before.
Yeah, you can sense the momentum, can't you? Amazing. So here we have Mickey Fellens describing exactly what you're talking about. Amid the deafening roar of cheers, several inmates warned us of danger by pointing to one of the 8 towers which surrounded the electrically charged fence, which, of course, the towers were manned by the SS. Half crazed ourselves at what we had just seen, we rushed the tower with rifles blazing. The SS tried to train their machine guns on us, but we quickly killed them each time a new man attempted to fire the guns. We killed all 17 SS, then in mad fury, our soldiers dragged the dead bodies from the towers and emptied their rifles into the dead SS chests.
Wow.
And there are some graphic photos ahead. But these are SS at Dachau. And some of the as we'll see, there's just general violence happening. The prisoners are looking for anything and anyone that looks like the guards. And, you know, sometimes they're even recognized having put on prisoners' clothing, but they're taken care of.
That's a very famous photo, that one. That's one it often comes up when you're searching for Dachau, and you can read a lot into that. All the faces there are telling so many different levels of the story there. Accuser and accused, and perpetrator and victim. So much going on there.
Yep. And here are some of the SS. One of the men in Company H says, "We were approached by many of the prisoners who begged us for guns so that they could kill some of the remaining guards. Many of us carried extra weapons and gave them out." So I'm always appreciative of the frankness and the honesty with which these things can be spoken about, because it's important. It's important to say what really happened. So here's another account with an MP with the 15 Corps. The last real picture in my mind is inmates using the guns that he says were given to them by the 42nd Division and his guys. I guess things were happening so fast and the scene was so terrible. Now it is just a flash.
Wow.
And this is a particularly gruesome photograph that I saw for the first time just yesterday, as a matter of fact. It looks like this guy's had his head bashed in by a rifle butt. It's pretty. I kept it kind of small on the screen. I was like,
yeah, no, definitely. And I won't linger on it. And it's just that, it's that there's conversations going on the sidebar about justice and trials and the due process and things like that, and revenge. And I don't think any of us watching this can cast our minds back to what it could have possibly been like for these GIs to see this and to be part of this, or if you're one of the prisoners who's been released, all this pent up anger and frustration and bitterness, and it's a wonder that more horrific stuff didn't happen. It's a wonder that it was some kind of cap was kept on it so it didn't just get completely out of control, because I can only imagine what I would feel in any of these situations. Just your basic animal instincts coming out, I think.
Yeah, you know, I neither accept or I wasn't there. I'm aware that we are seeing we're seeing literal snapshots. We're not having the literally 60-pound or whatever prisoner grabbing at our leg. We're not being told that, you know, they were abused this way, and this way. We're not smelling the smells. We're not being bombarded. Every single one of their senses were being bombarded by horrible things that hopefully none of us will ever see. So I'm, you know, not saying I approve. I'm not saying, I just know I wasn't there. That's always my opinion on it. And I do appreciate when they tell the truth about what happened.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's so many things going on at the same time. It's no wonder these guys they were in shock. I mean, if nothing else, that they weren't even able to process things in a rational way. Everything, as you say, is happening so fast, being confronted by scenes that we began watching this, understanding that we've all seen images of this kind of stuff before. We've seen footage. We know these guys had no comprehension of that. Yes, as you said, that the world had heard about it in a limited way back in the 1930s, but the actual scale of this, the actual realization and the smells and the sensory overload these guys would happen. I mean, just it doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine if I was standing at the foot of a crowd of 33,000, well, not all of them were, you know, able to crowd up, but I would be so sensory overload in that moment alone. And then if the SS were firing down on them, that brings in a whole other layer to the, I mean, it's, yeah. So
Yeah.
Moving on, right? Moving on.
Yeah.
General Linden tours the camp with a reporter and apparently saw every square inch and took in all the information. And he went into the barracks and he went into the crematorium, which I don't even think I have a picture of the crematorium. And I don't even think I'm mentioning it, but it was real. It was there. He saw everything. He saw the entire compound, and he describes the men who were lying in ragged, dirty clothing and bedding and were living skeletons. So again, we have the people who could rush the gates and be a part of the mayhem, and the people who were unable to move. And Ben Lesser was one of those men. So Ben and his cousin Isaac could hear the cheers and the madness and the mayhem. And Ben says they held onto each other and hobbled shakily outside of their barrack. The Americans were so shocked at what they were seeing that they were on their knees vomiting. And he says he remembers 2 young GIs who approached him and Isaac, and this sentence says so much. They tried to mask their horror at the sight of us with friendly smiles. They gave Ben and Isaac some Spam or canned meat. And they both became severely ill, and then Isaac died in Ben's arms.
I mean, that's a tragedy. I mean, that happened at Belston in the previous show, is that the rioting was so bad, and that the prisoners were breaking into the foodstuffs, and then the British soldiers basically just watched some of these people kill themselves with overeating over the next few hours and days. And tragedy upon tragedy, layers of heartbrokenness that you can't comprehend, and just to have survived liberation and then die because you just eat a can of Spam. I mean, it's all tragic, but there's a particular level of tragedy about that. Yeah. We had a couple of questions about the segregation of the camp, because you're talking about mostly men, because Dachau was one of the ones, correct me if I'm wrong, that was segregated, men and women in different places. Is that still? Yeah.
Overall, I mean, there were women there, and you guys are on it. I'll get to that in a second.
I know their stuff.
But no, it's good. It's helpful, because I'm like, okay, good. I did put together a good presentation answering the questions. So, what about, we know about all of these throngs of prisoners, but what about our people that we've talked about? Edith, who was forced to work in the brothel, she was there. She was there the day the division and the other elements of the other divisions came through, and she was liberated by them. The brothel wasn't working anymore, but she was a woman in the camp. So yes, she was in another portion of the camp. Georg, our antisocial artist, he was there. And also Edgar, our diarist, who wrote over 1,800 pages of things happening in the camp, he was there. And immediately upon finding any Allied soldier who would talk to him, he started telling them about his diaries. He was so excited to offer them as proof of what had happened. So here are some female prisoners from Dachau who were liberated that day. I already spoke a bit about the difference between the emaciated prisoners and the prisoners who don't look, so bad physically. And I don't know for a fact, but I'm going to guess these may have been Hungarian Jewish women who had arrived late, and that is why they look the way they do, but I'm not certain of that. There was a barracks of women that the GIs encountered and told a number of stories about. Obviously, these women were not treated well in the way the women are not treated well in war. And they also, very important and wonderful and sad, but wonderful, is that many women in the camps, through all of the camps, not just Dachau, but became pregnant. And some of them actually carried their babies through. And in the subcamps of Dachau, there were several women liberated with their babies.
Amazing. We've got some more distressing photos, which we'll move through fairly quickly. But yeah, I'll hand it back to you.
So just a reminder, this is what our GIs saw also, and you can move. We've seen the sadness. Yeah. This is horrible, right? For us, we don't want to look at it. We want to move through. It's too much to comprehend.
And I want to just make a plea to the viewers there, because this show, because of the content and the photos, it will get partially demonetized by YouTube, which means the algorithm will push it down. So I'm going to request all you viewers out there, share it on your Facebook groups, share it with your friends, because the algorithm will not push this show, because I won't be able to get it fully monetized, which means it'll be pushed down. So it's down to you guys out there to make sure that people see this, because so the way the system works, the images are harrowing. So yeah, do your work, people of World War II TV, so people see this. Thank you.
I did not know that. I am so sorry.
It's just how it works, unfortunately.
I am so sorry. I'm actually.
No, it's not. I mean, no, don't be sorry. I would. You know, we need to put the images in. That's what we do here. We share history. I'm just saying that the way it works is that they will be because advertisers don't want to put adverts for you know, candy bars in the middle of a video like this. So when a show gets partially demonetized, the algorithm doesn't push it. So it's just a system. We all understand how it works. But folks, share it. So there we go. Back to you.
All right. So we have Rabbi Bonin here, who is pretty well known actually in war history because he was the first rabbi into Dachau. And some of the men of the Rainbow Division were, as I mentioned, absolutely devoted to sharing this story, and he is one of them. And they really became the backbone of gathering the history and compiling it so that people like us could come along and learn. And his assistant chaplain says that when they walked into the Jewish barracks and Chaplain Bonin announced in Yiddish, "I am an American rabbi," the torrent unleashed. These men were able to find something that they could hold on to that literally symbolized freedom. American rabbi. If a rabbi is allowed here, oh my gosh, we are truly free, right?
Yeah.
And I love this sentence from the assistant chaplain. "I felt humble and uncomfortable that they were rushing forward to hug and kiss us, for it was I who should have been hugging and kissing them."
Wow.
Another amazing story from the Rainbow Division in Dachau is Father Erb. Now, there were several, I think something like 15 or 20 chaplains in the division. Father Erb was with the division that day, and he wanted to go to the priest block, to the priest barracks, where they were holding the clergymen. He goes inside and he finds 15 of his own order, one of which who had ordained him in Vienna in 1933. And so he was able to take these men personally and bring them to freedom.
Wow.
This story from James Doris is amazing. He was on guard, and while he was there, a prisoner came up to the fence and asked him if he had a cigarette, and he was afraid of a riot. So he said no, because he didn't have enough for everybody. And a few minutes later, the prisoner comes back with a rusty little tin can, and it had about a half of a cigarette butt in it. And the prisoner handed it to him and said, "This is for you from us. Thank you for liberating us."
Yeah, thank you.
And this is Bud, my friend Bud, who was there as well. He was out patrolling the woods around the SS barracks, and prisoners came rustling out of the bushes. They were told to be on guard for guards who had disguised themselves as prisoners. But Bud says this was obvious they were prisoners. And they got down on all fours, kissed his boots, and it really choked him up. And that was the moment where it really came forward for him. Another thing he said is the first thought a lot of the guys had in this experience was, what the heck did these people do to deserve this? As in, nobody would treat somebody like this unless they were like really bad people. So
and we had a question earlier about whether your friend Bud is still with us.
He is. I just talked to him yesterday.
Fine, some good news. It's taken an hour and 23 minutes. We've got some good news. Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
So here we have reference to old blood and guts puking. General Patton. This GI said, "It all got to be too much for me and I threw up, but I didn't feel bad because I later found out that General Patton did the same thing." He also said that When he was in Munich on guard, some prisoners in their pajamas came marching forward with some guards who they were bringing to the Americans because these guards had taken care of them in Dachau and had been merciful, and they wanted to share this. So,
okay, thank you.
And then this was a Jewish soldier who wanted to prove that a Jew could fight. He was very clear about that. When later in the camp he saw who he calls a little Jewish fellow in a corner weeping, he said, "I'm an American soldier." He tried to calm him, and the first thing he could think of was to hand him the wad of cash he had taken off an SS officer the day before. And the Jewish man said, "This is too much of a gift. I can't accept this." And they agreed that he would exchange the cash for the yellow star that he had. And on the next page, we'll see that star. It's this. So I think if I tried to do the conversion, I think that's equivalent to about $30,000 today that he gave.
Wow. Good grief. Wow.
So this is General Collins saying, very matter of fact, been there, done that, moving on to Munich. General Collins also viewed the camp in depth, and that I know of, he's never described it much. He's let everybody else do that. He was doing his job that day. So they did move on to Munich. They took Munich, and the division newspaper on May 11th has that on the front page, and then inside there is a section about Dachau. And they were still writing letters home to their families. I haven't included any of those, but they exist. And those are very raw tellings of a really raw day. But this is something they would never forget.
Absolutely.
So they rescued around 33,000 survivors. There were overall about 190,000 imprisoned in Dachau. So around 41,500 documented dead inside of Dachau through all of time. I was really struck by something. I talked to Bud yesterday, and I was saying, I'm trying to figure out how many men were actually in the Rainbow Division through the whole course of the war. And, there are numbers all over the internet about everything, and it's hard to know what's real. And Bud said, I think about 19,000. I think I remember that figure. And I said, okay. And it really struck me today. 19,000 men, I can't wrap my head around that. As someone who wants to know about every single one of these men who served in the Rainbow Division, 19,000, I wouldn't get to it in my lifetime. It was almost double that. Survivors inside of Dachau when they got there.
Yeah. Yeah. The numbers thing is so hard to get my head around. That this number of survivors, but of course that many people didn't make it through to survival. So that it's a lot survived, but a lot didn't survive. And this, as you reminded us, this is one of thousands of such locations across Germany and Poland where this kind of depravity was unfortunately an all too common experience. But amazing stuff. But the trials. Yeah,
1 in 3 people were sick, according to what I saw on the Dachau website. So I trust their numbers. So 1 in 3 of those 33,000 who were still alive were ill. So yes, moving on, the Dachau trials, super briefly, not going to go there, but they happened. And what's super cool is Georg Tauber and Edgar Kupfer-Kobrovitz, their creative work and their documentary work that they did in secret was used as evidence against all of these people who committed these crimes against the prisoners. And these are the Dachau camp officials who were tried. It was separate from Nuremberg, by the way. And the fellow that I've circled there, who we met at the very beginning of this presentation, is Rupert.
Yeah.
So 42 were found guilty. 36 were sentenced to death. My mouth is getting tired. And of these, 23 were hanged. And Rupert was one of them. And again, years later, years later, after he was hanged, it started coming forward little bits of evidence that he may have been the person responsible for murdering those women, among his many other crimes.
Yeah. And he's that symbol of how, or like the Christopher Browning book, Just Ordinary Men, that how theoretically ordinary people could just get swallowed up by this and start falling for all the propaganda and the brainwashing and the bullshit, and then end up being a perpetrator of this evil ideology. I mean, it's not that these are necessarily psychopaths who had a predetermined, determined kind of likelihood to end up with violence. They just, so many were just ordinary people who just ended up part of it because they're human beings. Yeah, terrible.
Yeah. And Dr. Siegfried Ruff, who was the director of aviation medicine, who oversaw all those horrible experiments that had to do with the Luftwaffe, he was tried at Nuremberg. He was acquitted, and he worked for the United States Army Air Force until his death in 1989.
Yeah, let's not dwell on that. Let's move on to something slightly cheerier.
Way cheerier. Ben Lesser is still alive, and he devotes himself to sharing his story. He wrote a book, which is on the screen. It's also here, and I highly recommend that you read it. He went through a lot, and his story deserves to be known. He speaks and educates about his experiences all the time.
Yeah, brilliant. Good for him.
Yes. And then, of course, Bud. We've established Bud is still alive. He's tonight on a plane to Dachau to be at the 80th commemoration, and he turns 101 in June.
Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant stuff.
This is Mario, who was another prisoner who was there that day. These men arrived and liberated them. He was imprisoned in 1944 for associations with Italian communists, and he's alive and well, and he's also going to be at the commemoration this year.
Fantastic. I'm so glad that this wonderful discussion is ending a little bit more in an uplifting way, because it's important that it's the rainbow division, because after the storm comes the rainbow kind of thing, and there is hope. There is a message that's coming out of this that it doesn't take away the tragedy, but it gives a little bit of a sense of the human spirit coming through, which is important. So thank you.
Yeah, this is Emilion. We met him as well. He is still with us. I don't think he will be at the commemorations this year, but he was unconscious in the dirt when the Americans found him. He wanted to go to a commemoration because he'd never been able to thank a liberator. He spotted Bud. Bud was the first liberator he spotted. He made a beeline. He said, "Thank you," shook his hand. He was crying. And his grandson said to Bud, "I live because of your deeds. I live because of the deeds of the Allies."
Wow.
And here is Bud with a Thunderbird, 45th Division, who, as I mentioned, were there that day as well. And Bud and Dan were together at the commemoration 2 years ago. And to their right is Leslie Rosenthal, one of those babies who was born in the subcamp.
Wow. This is why, I mean, I live in Normandy, the set commemorations here. There are always these moments of people meeting up from one unit to other unit, civilians, eyewitnesses, children thanking people that saved their parents. These are moments that amongst all the formal commemorations and the speeches, it's these little moments that actually always move me more so than a senator or a member of parliament or someone standing up and doing a kind of paint by numbers speech. It's these moments that hit me.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember, as you kind of were just saying, Paul, it's like there's so much hope and there's so much life after these horrible things, but it's also important to remember that they don't ever need to happen again, because it still stays inside of the people who experience it. And this quote, I don't remember where I picked it up, but and I'm totally paraphrasing it, but one of the women in the brothel, her daughter said about her life, "I don't think she actually survived the camp. She just stayed alive beyond it. And that is
so many incredibly powerful. Yeah. 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 The body survived, but the mind essentially didn't. Yeah.
Yep. And then we're closing now. We're wrapping up. And I know this is getting long, but I chose this image. For me, it's very, very powerful because it feels like an expression of what everybody who experienced this lives like. They are that soldier with the camera in front of their face, and it's frozen in their mind. That shot is what they live with. And it's a really powerful image for me because of that. Spending so much time with survivors and soldiers, people who've been through combat, not just liberators. They work in many cases to remove that freeze frame from out of their minds.
Yeah.
So Jack Westbrook said, you know, this was one of the most distressing and depressing moments I've ever had, and it will stay with me forever. All of us, he says.
How could it not? Yeah.
And Mickey Fellens acknowledges, you know, had this gone on, this plan succeeded, it would be a world of depravity. I'm paraphrasing again, but he says, thank God this plan will never be fulfilled. Tony Cardinale, who alerted Colonel Downard to the survivor on the train, he said, somebody had to have saved these helpless people from these madmen, and it turned out that we and the other units were the chosen ones.
Wonderful.
So this is the way they're all kind of grappling with this, right? This left for the number of decades after which they lived. And then I think this is the second to last slide. Thank you to everyone who's still with us. Naren Gunn, in his book, The Day of the Americans, is writing to the unknown GI, the first GI he saw that day. And he says, you made us suddenly understand that the world was still composed of human beings, that there were still men who were ready to give up their lives to save ours without trying to strike a bargain or ask for anything in return. For you came to liberate, not to conquer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that brings it home.
And then our closing slide is a poem that was written by D. Eberhardt, who was one of the historians who stuck with the division for years and compiled its history. And he was a poet. And he wrote a number of beautiful poems about his experiences and Dachau. It was really hard to choose just one. I won't read this whole poem out for time's sake, but he wrote this in response to going to Dachau to place the memorial plaque on the Jour House wall. And so he's describing that. And he says, as the millennium ends, we return to Dachau in finality, leaving only our message of caution for those who believe and those who deny. Currents of evil run deep and eternal. This our warning must last forever. Be alert and full determined so that never again will anyone anywhere ever again be forced once more to return to Dachau. And he's
you've found some amazing stuff at us today, Erin. Good grief, that's the emotions coming at me hard and fast. It's amazing stuff. And folks, you can read all these poems at greater length later on and look these people up. Amazing. And then your final slide is how people can find out more about what you do. And there's other links. You've got so many websites and blogs and things. It's such a creative soul you are, putting that information out there. And it's just, what a tour de force performance and amazing history. And, you know, I don't want to go down a massive rabbit hole, but every time I do these shows, I think to myself, how the fuck can there still be Holocaust deniers out there? How the hell can people out there still be claiming this didn't happen? We literally have the photos, we have the evidence, the testimonies, we have the maps, the plans, the German orders. It just, you know, how are we going to solve it except keep telling the stories? Just hope that we convert people one at a time, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my feeling is always like, it's just, this is pure opinion, which I'm sort of loath to give out on the internet, but my pure opinion is it's disrespectful to the people who genuinely were scarred for life because of it. It's so just like, why? What? Yeah. You know, people got hurt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we will leave things there, folks. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. And as I say, make sure you share this particular show because the algorithm won't be favoring it very much. Check out Erin's work elsewhere. Check out our other content on the Holocaust. Tomorrow, we're with Phil Craig again, talking about 1945 and Vietnam and Dutch Indonesia. And then we have more stuff coming at you, talking about Romania. We've got shows with Stuart Burbridge, who's in the crowd now, talking about the RAF Night Fighter campaign. So loads of things coming up. So as always, click like and subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. But thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. It's been brilliant. So thank you very much.
Thank you
bye,
so
everybody.
much.
Bye.
Bye.